Okay, all looks good. Hi everyone, thanks for joining in. You might have noticed that I'm actually using a different account tonight to do our Facebook Live because, as some of you know, I have been having a few issues with Facebook Lives, so hoping it's all goes well tonight. Want to thank Domhnall for joining me, Domhnall O'Donoghue. For those who might have seen Domhnall before, he's actually been our author for the day. So great to have you back again.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
So Domhnall's from, is it Navan? Is that how I say it?
Oh, no, Navan.
Navan,
Navan, yes.
okay.
But that's quite a glamorous pronunciation, Navan. I might see, could I get that going when I head home?
And is a graduate of a Bachelor in Acting Studies program from Trinity College in Dublin, and later completing a Master's in Screenwriting at, you might need to say where you did your Master's of Screenwriting.
Oh, yes. Well, the National Film School in Dunleary.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks for that. Thanks for helping me out with that.
No
He
problem.
now works as a journalist, actor, and author. So very busy with lots of different things on the go, it sounds like. And his first novel was Sister Agatha, the world's oldest serial killer, which was published in late 2016. And I have to say, I recently read that book and really enjoyed it. It was a great read.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And in 2019, with Mercer Press, Ireland's oldest publishing house, he released Colin and the Concubine. And his latest novel is Crazy for You, which was released last year. For 4 years, Domhnall enjoyed the responsibility of being assistant editor at Irish Tatler Man, a title that won Consumer Magazine of the Year. And thanks to this exciting role, he interviewed a host of high-profile names such as Tommy Hilfiger, Kevin Spacey, and Chris Pine. So sounds like you're really experienced with interviews. So maybe you can give me a few tips with some of the interviews.
You're doing perfectly so far. Absolutely.
And you've had lots of acting, a great acting career in that as well. So just thanks so much for joining us. Really excited to have you back again, as I said. And one thing I've really been looking forward to chatting to you is to hear your Irish accent.
Well, you're doing a great job with the pronunciations because the Irish language, the Gaelic language, is really, really tricky, even for Irish people to pronounce. So, we were talking earlier on about the spelling of my name. So there's a little rule of thumb in Gaelic. If you see MHs, BHs, DHs in the middle of words, they're silent. But if they're at the start of a word, they could be a V sound or a B sound. So it's absolutely confusing. So I think you're doing a great job pronouncing some of those words. So well done.
No, it is a bit confusing. That's why Google's helpful to check up
Absolutely.
pronunciations.
Yes.
Just wondering if you want to start off by telling us a little bit about your latest book.
Sure. Well, just to say, I'm actually here in Venice at the moment.
Oh, really?
I'm not in Ireland.
Amazing.
Yes.
So you can't, have you got a wonderful view out your window?
Well, I do, but it's funny because a lot of my friends from Ireland have been texting me over the past few days saying how lucky I am being in Venice. But the funny thing is, at the moment, it's warmer in Ireland and it's drier
Oh,
in
really?
Ireland. Yes, so November's not a great month to come to Venice for those reasons. But nonetheless, no matter what the weather is, the views across Venice and the lagoon are just incredible. So actually, where we're staying at the moment, my partner's from Venice, and I'm sure some of your followers know that across the lagoon there are 118 islands, and the biggest of those islands is called Lido, which is where the Venice Film Festival is. So Jennifer Lopez was just here recently, Ben Affleck. But it's a beautiful island, and it features in my first book that you mentioned, Sister Agatha. So that's where we're at the moment. So what really helps with that, it gives you a view then over the lagoon towards St. Mark's Square. And when the sun is out or the sun is setting, it's just magical. I posted a picture actually on my Facebook page just the other day. So if anyone's friends with me on Facebook, have a quick look and you'll see what but it's just very, very, very magical. So that's where I am at the moment. But funny enough, just to look back to your question, you see, I'm not that good an interviewee. I don't even answer questions that you ask. But the question that you did ask was about my book. I always try and use my travel experience, because out of my journalism work, I largely focus on travel writing. Now, obviously, with the lockdown, that has changed a lot. So my focus has been domestic travel around Ireland. This is actually my first time away in 2 years. So with Crazy for You, the locations were Jamaica, which was a press trip I went on a few years ago, which was just transformative, not just, you know, in terms of fun, but just in terms of the friendships I created, the culture I was exposed to, the adventures that I had. And then another trip that I had was skiing, the first time I ever went skiing in the Austrian Alps. So I took those two experiences. I set the initial part of the story in Navan, which is where I'm from, or Navan, as you like to call it. I quite like that, actually, Navan. And then also Connemara, which, for my money's worth, is one of the most beautiful regions in all of Europe. And I might be a little bit biased because I lived there for 10 years, but it's at the very west of Ireland.
Okay.
When people think of Ireland, you know, the beautiful green mountains, the rainbows, the wild Atlantic, that's what they're thinking about, the west of Ireland, Connemara. So they were my four locations. And I'll tell you this, when you have a setting, you know, that's so magnificent like Jamaica or Connemara or the Alps or Navan, it really helps generate content, really helps you with the story. And then you just kind of parachute your characters in and let them loose and see what happens.
Yeah.
So yes, so that was just, not, I won't say it was an easy write, but it just really, really helped when I had all these lovely experiences that I could draw upon. Because one of the downsides I always feel about, you know, writing an article about somewhere as vast as Jamaica, somewhere as, you know, dynamic and storied as Austria, is that you only have sometimes 800 words to do it. You know, and sure, you can only just give a taster of a location. So when you have the freedom of 70, 80,000 words in a novel, you can, you know, have another wonderful opportunity to write and document the culture and the experiences. So that's something that I did in all my books, but definitely in my most recent book, Crazy for You.
Yeah. And can you tell me, like you said about the locations and that, is location what comes to you first when you're thinking of a novel?
Well, do you know what? I love travel. My family has always loved travel. And I love when an author takes me on a journey, or a filmmaker or a musician. It can just transport you in a second. And particularly during lockdown, where we've all been stuck indoors, we've had to almost give our virtual passports over to artists to take us around the world. So I love that I can do that with my work, that I can bring my readers around the world. So usually it starts with the kernel of a story. You know, what is the story? And who do I want to tell the story? What characters are best equipped to tell the story? What genre is best suited to it? Because my first 3 books have been comedy, but I never sat down and said, I'm writing a comedy. I always kind of thought, this is the story I want to tell. These are the characters who I want to tell it. And this is the style. And then I'll say, well, where best will allow me to tell the story. And all my 3 books have been, you know, rooted in Navan, my hometown. But then they take flight and they journey elsewhere. So I have, you know, a long list, thankfully, because of my work, of places that I have visited extensively. So I can just kind of scan that in my mind and think, okay, where best to bring them? You know, what are the possibilities there? What kind of contrasts can emerge? What similarities exist? So, for example, at the moment, I'm writing a sequel for Sister Agatha, my first book, which I didn't intend to do at all. Just this year, I was fed up, like everybody else in the world, being stuck indoors. And I said, you know what? I just want to spend a couple of weeks having some fun.
Yeah.
And to me, Sister Agatha is just fun. It's silly, it's nonsense, it's ridiculous, but it's fun. That was always my goal with it. So with her, I had to think of where best to send her this time. And one of the places was called Spinalonga, which is a small little island off the coast of Crete. And I'd say lots of the followers here on Facebook will know about Spinalonga, thanks to Victoria Hislop, who wrote the book The Island.
Oh, yes,
which was about the leper colony. So it was a one-time Venetian fortress, and then it was the Greek government turned into a leper colony. So I visited there before I knew about Victoria Hislop, and before I even knew about her book. And it was really the local people who were saying, oh, you must have read the book, and I hadn't. And I was just absolutely mesmerized that, not in my lifetime, but in my parents' lifetime, this place existed. And the leper colony still exists in this world, still. Where people were literally just shipped off, removed from their families, and sent off to this island at all ages. Imagine that's your child. So I was absolutely fascinated. And what was really fascinating about it was the story was so haunting, but the vista was so beautiful. Like, as you can imagine from, the Greek climate, these stunning blue skies, azure waters, lovely warmth, and the music and the food and the drink. And then this was their history. So off I went and I read The Island, and it was a very different book to the one that I had in my mind, but it's always nice, when you make those connections. And I'm actually reading the sequel to the book at the moment. So I always wanted to write something, and I was going to write something very different about, not necessarily Spinalonga, but a leper colony, because I think that often can represent, a lot of the suppression that exists in the world, the idea of being marginalized by society, not fitting in, being forced out, literally to an island. And that's always cropped up in my work, because I suppose as a gay man growing up in Ireland in the 80s and 90s, I would have very much have felt that, being isolated, marginalized. So I'm always looking for those kind of similarities, that are authentic to me. So anyway, so Sister Agatha potters off to Spinalonga for a little adventure.
I'll have to look out. Yeah, I'll be looking out for that one, because I loved Sister Agatha. Yeah.
Oh, well, she's it's funny because she's my first attempt as a novel, and I came back to it this year, largely because I wanted to reread it, before I started writing the sequel, and it's very humbling, rereading your first effort. And, at one hand, you're there cringing at some of the structures of the sentence, or if it's overwritten, or the few errors or typos. But it's also really rewarding to go, since then, I've learned so much. I've learned so much about the craft, largely thanks to working with various editors, reading more, talking and listening to authors, that I'm able to then draw upon that. And then, have a look and kind of see where was, a bit flabby and whatnot. So, yes, so that's what I was working on over the summer. So that was just an example of a place that I visited that I always said to myself, I want to use that as a location somewhere.
Yeah. And why write a novel? Like, you'd already had a successful career acting, and why did you decide you wanted to write a novel? And was it something you've been wanting to do for a long time?
Well, it's a great question, and it's one that I talk about a lot, because I started off my career as an actor, and when I went to Trinity when I was 17 to study, that was my only plan, just to act. That's all I wanted to do. And then I came out, and everything was fine, and I was working. But no matter how busy you are as an actor, it is a part-time job. You might work a few days on a film, or you might film an advertisement or do a play, but you could be kicking stones, is an expression we have in Ireland, being idle, kicking stones, for 8 months of the year, 6 months of the year. And aside from just the boredom of that and the lack of finance that goes along with that, it can be very disempowering if you're always dependent on the permission of other people to allow you to be creative. You know, if you're dependent on a director, a casting director, an agent. And that just didn't sit well with me because, you know, I was ready to go. I was ready to tell stories at the time, other people's stories, but nonetheless, I wanted to tell stories. So then I just decided, you know what, I'm going to start making my own work. And it's a journey that a lot of actors start off on. You know, they start off as acting and then they'll soon start becoming, whether they're theatre makers or writers or whatever it is, and they'll use that as a stepping stone. So initially, I focused on screenwriting. It was the most natural extension because obviously, as an actor, I was always working with screenplays and plays. So that's what I first started doing. And then I ultimately went and I studied it, you know, at third level, you know, a postgrad, a master's. And funnily enough, I kind of thought, okay, all my problems are solved. You know, I'm now able to write screenplays. I'll be able to make all these wonderful stories. But it's even more difficult being a screenwriter than it is being an actor, because essentially you're demanding, you know, funding authorities, producers to give you millions to make your work. So from that, I kind of just moved a little bit into journalism, and largely because I thought, you know what, it might help me get a script across the line if I can have it in like a column form. I remember, I think I was watching, maybe it was Sex and the City or something like that, and, you know, her columns were then used to create a book. And so I kind of thought, you know, it just might give a bit of gravitas to this project if some of it could find its way in a magazine. So at the time I was developing a project about weddings. So I wrote this column about going to weddings, because at the time I was going to weddings all the time. You know, I think there comes a period in everyone's life around their like mid-20s to kind of mid-30s where you're just weddings every week. So I wrote a column called The Plus One, and it was published in a magazine. So I kind of thought I'll use that to send to producers and say, hey, look, I have this column. You know, this is kind of a stepping stone to a screenplay. But then from doing that column, an editor of the editor of a new magazine called Irish Tatler Man contacted me and said, do you want to write for us? We really liked your column. And I'm like, okay. It was just not expected at all. And it was just so different to acting, because as an actor, you're always knocking on doors. You're always, you know, begging to get an audition or then begging to get a part. And all of a sudden, someone's calling me saying, will you write for us? And from there, just a magical 4 years happened. You know, I was with the magazine until it closed, unfortunately, like a lot of magazines around the world at the time. But it just offered me so many wonderful opportunities, not just to interview some of my icons like Tommy Hilfiger, but to travel. Just to travel and see all these incredible places. So then I had all these wonderful experiences, like I was saying earlier on, of traveling, wanting to use them, you know, beyond the pages of the magazine. And then I just thought to myself, do you know what? You do not need a single penny to produce a book. You just need you just need your computer. So I was just fed up with this whole idea of having to wait, you know, for the permission from somebody to give me 2, 3, 4 million quid. So I'm going to write a book. So my partner, who I say is from Venice, he was moving back here, and he invited me to come with him. So it was the first time in my life I made a decision following my heart as opposed to my head. Because so many of my decisions before then were with my head, career. And actors, they never go on holiday because they're always petrified that they'll miss an audition or they'll miss a job. So I said, you know what? I'm going to Venice. I'm going to Venice for 6 months. And off I went. And I wrote Sister Agatha. And it just kind of, and you know what? That was the first. And because it was so rewarding to be able to actually create something alone and then to send it out into the world, I said, you know what, I can do this. This is actually a structure I can really work with. And because initially I said, you know, even if it's just my mother who reads this book, that's fine, no problem. But it was just really fulfilling for me to do it. Thankfully, many more people other than my mother read it, you know. But it just was a wake-up call to me and goes, this is actually a really good way to be creative, to be empowered. And then particularly when the lockdown started, you know, it was a wonderful way to spend my weeks. So that's a long
that's a great a great story. And how hard or easy was it to get that first book published?
Right. Well, that's a great question. And when it comes to writing, something that's it's what's quite nice to know at the back of your mind is, even if publishers don't come on board, you can always self-publish. So I'm just seeing there, my battery is just on the low. Let me just double check. I have enough. 10%. Okay, I should be fine. But that is a good question. Because in the back of my mind, I always said, like, I'll self-publish if all else fails. And because the genre of comedy is a tricky sell, to publishers, particularly in Ireland. A couple of publishers said, look, what we're looking for is drama, stories that are, rooted in the real world, not a 118-year-old nun who wants to be a serial killer, But thankfully, anyway, there were a couple of publishers who said, no, we really like this. So we ultimately decided, when I say we, I say my agent and I, we decided to go with Tiergar, a publishing company based in County Meath, the Royal County of Meath, which is where I'm from. And what I really liked about her, other than the fact that her company was in the same county as mine, was that she would call the publishing company a digital first publishing company. Now, with my release, we did digital and print, but largely they would normally do digital first, and then if it's a success, they would then fund print. But because obviously the world has transformed, the world of reading, the world of writing has transformed in the last few years, thanks to the digital world. So I really love the idea that at very little cost, my book could be available. Australia, I know South Africa, all the countries where your members are from, or members of this group is from, and that's fascinating. So I had a lovely experience working with her, working with my editor there. And another thing that she developed, Kem is the CEO. She had this authors group where authors could have a chat, because up until then I didn't really know many authors. I knew them having read their book, but I wouldn't have had the confidence to reach out to them and ask them questions. So all of a sudden, a pool of 50 actors, the actor coming out to me, 50 authors, where we could have a yabber, have a jibber jabber, and discuss this, discuss that, and give advice and feedback, and that was wonderful. So that really set me up, I think, for the rest of my journey as an author.
No, it sounds like it was a great pathway.
Yes, a brilliant pathway. I'm very, very grateful for that.
Yeah. And I've got a question from someone watching. So Belinda wonders, where has been your favourite place to travel to?
Oh, that's such a good question. Do you know, as I say, when I'm using my travel, experiences in my book, I when you write a book, it could last 2, 3, 4 years. So even though an experience might be 2 days away, but when I'm using it in my book, I'm reliving it for like 2, 3 years. So at the moment, as I say, I'm writing a book, that's set in Spinalonga, that's set in Salem and Boston, that's set up in Iceland, and I'm just reliving all these wonderful, wonderful moments. But those experiences might have been only 2, 3 days. But if I had to say one place, I'd have to say Jamaica. Jamaica was just otherworldly, and largely, if anybody reads my book Crazy for You, there's a hotel in Jamaica called the Jamaican Inn. And I learned about that years ago because one of my icons is Noel Coward. So Noel Coward would have been, he would have arrived a little later than Oscar Wilde, but he would have been very much in that world. I'm sure some of you might have seen Private Lives, which is one of the most romantic films. He wrote the screenplay for that, but as well as he wrote, wonderful plays. Like Blight Spirit and The Vortex. But anyway, he would stay there in the Jamaican Inn. But it was this honeypot for the glitterati. So you had, the author of James Bond, Ian Fleming, he coins the phrase shaken not stirred there. You had Winston Churchill staying there. Marilyn Monroe had her honeymoon.
Wow.
So like this extraordinary history, and you go into the bar, the library, and there's all these pictures of like Arthur Miller and Marilyn Monroe hand in hand, Ian Fleming. So anyway, that was somewhere I always dreamed of going, but I never thought it would ever happen because I never thought I would have the means to go. But then work took me there, and I had this night there, and it was just extraordinary. And as soon as I went there, I said, this experience, it was only a night, because we traveled around Jamaica, and it was only one night. But I said, I'm going to use this one night in my book. And as I say, for 3 years when I was writing Crazy for You, I relived it, I relived it.
Amazing.
So it feels like I'm still there in the Jamaican Inn, even though I was doing there for one night. So if I had to say at a push, I'd say the Jamaican Inn in Jamaica.
No, that sounds great. And before I said about these wonderful interviews you've done, just wondering, is there anything you could share of maybe the one that you enjoyed the most, or maybe something exciting that happened in or surprising that happened in your interview that you'd be able to share to us?
Plugging in the computer there.
No, that's okay.
So, yeah, okay. It's very funny when when journalists get together of an evening, if they're on a trip, and we have a few little drinks, and the stories emerge.
Yeah.
But of course, we have to be very discreet in, share your stories. But I have heard some extraordinary stories that I couldn't repeat here, but about celebrities. And I've also seen a couple. Can I tell this story? We're all adults here, aren't we?
Yes. Yep.
There was. Should I say names? There was one experience I had, where basically I won't say any names, but anyway, an A-list Hollywood star was the brand ambassador for a new perfume, a new aftershave, and all journalists were invited from all over the world to go to London. Beautiful setting, a beautiful museum, to ask questions. And the structure of it was, journalists were brought in 3. So there were, let's say, maybe 300 journalists there. So we were all kind of sent off to have lunch or whatever, and then we had a slot to come back. So I came back, and I was with this Russian journalist and another journalist. And it was very, very strict. I love interviewing Irish people because, as you can see, Irish people have no filters. They just talk.
Yeah.
They talk. And I've gotten amazing quotes from some very well-known Irish people. Whereas I find the Americans, I'm not sure if they actually have a practical training in giving interviews, but they can often be very monosyllabic. Yes, no, yeah, which is a nightmare for an interviewer, particularly then when you have to go back and write, a feature around it. So we went into our slot, and the interview was a little bit monosyllabic, a little bit stiff. Again, I kind of think, how much can you talk about an aftershave? If you're talking about a film, you might have a little bit more. Excuse me. So this Russian journalist, who it turned out wasn't even supposed to be there, she was covering for a colleague. So she was reading her questions like this. And I was kind of getting a bit bored. And the next thing I hear her go, "What is your cock?" And I said, "What?" I said, "Hello, what is this interview getting suddenly interesting? What is your cock?" And everybody was like, "What did she just ask him?" And the actor, the famous actor, was like, "Sorry, what?" And straight away, like that, his PR woman says, we'll move on, next question. And I said, no, there must be something wrong here. So I peered into her sheet.
Yeah.
And the question was, what is your code? Because he was the brand ambassador for a perfume called Armani Code.
Oh, okay.
So she misread it. But what was so amazing, because everybody thought she'd said the word cock. So everybody started howling, laughing, and it really broke the ice. So all that formality of, not being allowed to ask certain questions, not being allowed to give certain replies, went out the window.
Yeah.
And from that, we just had a wonderful, wonderful time. And we really got to see the actor's personality.
Oh, yeah.
and so it was a lovely, happy accident that happened. Because, as I say, sometimes you can meet, really well-known people, and they're just really, really careful, not to say anything that could get them in trouble.
Yeah.
But the problem is then, as a journalist, I have to make sure that my readers aren't reading a boring interview.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I have to find a way of spicing it up or whatever. But I always think the best interviews that I've done are the ones where you never see me in the writing, where I allowed, I'm literally just a vessel for them to tell their stories. If you see me in the article, it means it's a boring, it's a boring interview. You know, I have to spice it up with anecdotes or nonsense. But I've interviewed, wonderful people like Brendan Gleeson, who's a very well-known Irish actor, and just brilliant storytellers. And you could just literally sit back for hours and just listen to them. And anyway, so it's very interesting being on either side of the questions.
Yeah.
Do you like it? Do you like asking questions?
Yeah, I do. I haven't done it. Well, I've done it for a while now with this group, but in the past it wasn't something I did. So I've slowly got a bit not quite as nervous and that. So yeah, but I do enjoy asking people questions and hearing their stories. Like you said, I really enjoy that.
Yes. Yeah. But it's great that, that is giving you the opportunity to do that.
Exactly.
You know? Yeah, well, I think you're natural.
You're too kind. Well, before we finish off, I just wondered if you'd like to tell people what sort of things you like reading yourself, and maybe if there is anything you've read lately that you could recommend to us.
Well, as I say, often when I write, I will often, look at other genres that match my style, or for example, I was writing about Sabina Longa, so at the moment I'm reading Victoria Hislop's sequel to The Island, not necessarily for the story or the writing, but just to bring me back. A writer that I discovered for the first time last year, lockdown, such an awful time for so many of us, but one of the silver linings was that we got to read a lot.
Yeah.
So I discovered Maggie O'Farrell, who's a Northern Irish writer, and she wrote Hamnet, and that appeared on almost everyone's best of lists last year. So since I was first introduced to her last year, I just downloaded and bought all her books.
Yeah.
So I'm reading one of her older books at the moment, Instructions on a Heat Wave, which I'm absolutely loving. A book that was really important to me was a lovely story called The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out the Window.
I've heard lots. I haven't read it, but I've heard lots of good reviews of it. Yeah, I actually bought it for my mother, and she enjoyed it.
Yes, yeah, and you know what? That really inspired me to write Sister Agatha. Because again, it's a very heightened reality, over-the-top characters overcoming over-the-top situations, and so a sequel was released. So I'm reading that at the moment as well. Another recommendation, another author that I love is an English author called Jessie Burton. And she's a very similar story to me, in that she started as an actor. And then she went off and she became an author. So she's absolutely wonderful. I'm so off with names. There's a lovely story there I read recently, Away with the Penguins.
Oh yes, I think
I've heard of this?
I've heard that.
So it'll be the same world as The 100-Year-Old Man. It's, I've always loved older people. My grandmother, I was always, hanging out with her growing up, and I always used to call into my neighbours, a lot of, widows and widowers, and I'd sit on their couch and we'd chat, and they'd give me biscuits and cake and all the rest. So I've always had a lovely connections with people older than me. And, something that's always frustrated me is that, society is often saying that once you reach a certain age, you're the best before. You're done. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Have you met my mother? My mother's in her late 70s. She ain't done, not by a long shot. Did you meet my like all these amazing people, men and women, who are just getting into their groove, in life. So that's something that I've always been drawn upon for my creative work, particularly older people, not just older people, but anybody who has a perceived limitation, whether that's physical, professional, emotional, creative. And I'm like, no. Don't put these people down. Don't put them in a box. Put them center stage and give them an opportunity to flourish and watch them fly. So that was very much, what I wanted to do with Sister Agatha. And, books like I'm saying, 100-Year-Old Man, Call of the Penguins. I love those stories about older people who go off and have one last adventure.
Yeah. You'll have to have a look. There's a couple of really great books along that sort of line that I've read lately by Australian authors.
Oh,
Banksia.
Okay.
I'm trying to remember their names. I read some, but yeah, the
Yes.
Banksia house residence, I think, was one, and Joanna Nell is another author, Australian author, who writes some great books about older people and like a bit of comedy in that as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
Great.
there's been
Oh,
some
well,
great
I definitely
ones.
look those up. Do
Yeah.
you ever find the term called technological amnesia? And it basically means because we're so overwhelmed with information,
Mm-mm.
we can't remember anything.
Yeah.
So I'm awful when it comes to remembering names of books. I
Yeah,
almost seem to.
I'm a bit like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Shelley's got a good question. She wonders if you'd ever write any books about, I think she means your mother or your grandmother's stories that they've shared with you.
Do you know what? Almost, throughout all my books, my
Mm,
family story, my own story, they've been interwoven very much so. Um, but it's a really interesting question because, I always say, whose story is this and what
mm,
permission do I have to
mm,
share it?
mm,
Because, just because I'm happy to share a certain story about me doesn't necessarily mean other people do as well. Um, so I'd always seek permission and I'd always, make sure that, the story I'm telling is something that they're happy with because this often crops up as well in my work as a journalist
yeah.
because I have a column for Woman's Way, which is, one of our main magazines. And that's a lovely platform for me to tell stories. And there was one story I told recently. I won't bore you with it now, but if anybody wants to go onto my Facebook and scroll down, they'll see a story that I wrote about my granny. Actually,
Okay.
that the question's
Mm,
been asked, and it was a story about an adventure she sent me on to Paris in the name
okay.
of cheese, Kerrygold cheese. So I always do draw upon small stories, anecdotes.
Mm,
They're there. They're there. They're in you. They're in your
mm,
blood. They're just in your mind subconsciously even. So I'm always doing that. There's a wonderful story I'd love to tell, about my father. My father's, one of my best friends, and he's one of my heroes. But he's a difficult upbringing.
mm,
He started off his life in an orphanage,
mm, mm,
and he has an really incredible journey. From the starting point to where he ended up professionally, and then in terms of the family that he had, and that's why he would be one of my heroes.
mm,
Because he did overcome so many
yeah.
obstacles from an early age, and so one day I might tell that story.
Yeah.
Um, in a way, if he's happy for me to do so. But yes, no, that's a
Mm,
great question, and absolutely, I'm always using real life experiences and characters. I mean, I always go around with a little notebook, and it's
okay,
awful
yeah.
because I'm sure I'll probably get in trouble someday because I often just go on my own with a coffee and just kind of observe people and sketch
Mm.
them in words, just kind of things that they might wear or body language or how they might drink their coffee themselves. And anyway, yes, I'm always observing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, it's been great chatting to you. Thanks. And thanks for joining us again. Like I said, you were author for the day, so it's great to have you back again. And I'm really looking forward to reading the next Sister Agatha.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, something exciting is happening with that as well. I won't say anything now, but maybe
Mm,
if I'm brought back, down the line, maybe next year we can have a chat again.
yeah,
Um,
I can
yes,
imagine.
but for
Yeah,
now, yeah.
sounds good. And do you want to let people know watching how they can keep in touch with you?
Yes, well, my Facebook page is open. So if you just want to come and ask to be my friend,
Mm,
please do, and I'll accept. I'm also on Instagram and I'm also on Twitter. So absolutely, yes, come and I'd love to. I'd love to, connect with you guys as well. It can't be a one-way street. I love meeting new friends through a love of the arts, through a love of writing and learning. Like the
mm,
recommendations you gave me earlier on about
yeah.
Australian writers, I can go and then download those. So if anybody does want, just have a natter and follow each other, like each other's pictures, whatever it is, please do follow me on Facebook.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much and hope to chat to you again.
Thank you so much, Jackie, and thanks so much for all your support. It's been
Yeah,
incredible. Thank you.
thanks. And thanks to everyone who joined in and asked some questions. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.